Good morning, everybody. This is Wesley Hudson, Chairman of Prosperity and Livability Committee. I'd like to call us to order today. We have 3 items on the agenda today. And the first will be a resolution to make High Point a Bee City, part of Bee City USA programming. And I know Rebecca's coming up with Keep High Point Beautiful.
Good morning. Thank you so much for your time today. We're excited to talk about Bee City USA. I'm speaking on behalf of Keep High Point Beautiful, but also Public Services. Keep High Point Beautiful operates under Public Services Department for the city. And Bee City USA is becoming a more and more popular avenue for people to utilize what they are already doing in their community, which we're already doing a lot of things in our community that support pollinators. And this would just be, I believe, a wonderful way to celebrate what we're doing and to even increase more so what we can do in the future to help with pollinators and protecting them. The first thing that I know when people hear the word bee, they think of probably the European honeybee, but some people truthfully think, am I going to get stung? Some people think this is Bee City. Do we want to be a city where we get stung? So just really quickly, if that ever comes up, most native species don't do that, and the males don't do the singing, and it's usually wasps or hornets that do that. So if anyone happens to say, what are we talking about here? We're not talking about anything scary. We are talking about, pollinators that we desperately need. And also Bee City does not focus on the honeybee or beekeepers. It does support what they do, but we're not today focusing on production of honey. We're looking at an even broader topic of why we need to support pollinators who are going to support us and the food chain and the food supply. Basically, if you had a plate of food in front of you and you had 3 things on that plate, one of them would have been supported by a pollinator, assuming you have something pretty healthy on that plate. So just wanted to share that. And you can see here some facts. We've received, a lot of this information came straight from Bee City. I'll tell you, they've got an impressive, easy to follow program. For us to join Bee City would not be hard at all. So again, just some of the key things that they've shared is that pollinators are a keystone species that we need globally. And so we would just be a part of supporting locally what will impact globally. Okay. Benefits. As you know, we have a lot of gardens around here. We've got Growing High Point doing their work. People have their own personal gardens at home. Keep High Point Beautiful has the garden at Ingleside. And so Guilford County has so many cooperative extension gardens at schools. And so we would just be, again, supporting what's already happening. Again, hopefully you know that pollinators are necessary to sustain the complete ecosystem. And this would also help local business. If production is going well for our local gardeners, farmers, then we're just helping them make their product, helping them sell, and it just comes full circle with that. Also, love the idea of bringing the community together. I think we have a wonderful community that's very cohesive, and this is just another way to bring our community together even further. Community awareness, again, as I was just speaking about, we want to be able to partner with businesses and organizations that are already very knowledgeable about pollinators. The Piedmont Environmental Center under Parks and Recreation, they do a native plant sale every year. We would kind of join in and support them. We would support the farmers market. We're already doing so much that this actually seems just a very easy, logical step for us to become Bee City. But we would have to focus some on, what are hazards to pollinators. We'd have to talk about what we're using as in way of pesticides, and we would just want to raise community awareness about what kind of plants help our pollinators. So education, again, is a big part. Using fewer pesticides when possible and discussing what pesticides we use in the city and educating people around our community. And then we're just going to work together, which we already do as Keep High Point Beautiful and then other organizations, to improve the environment overall. This is just another piece of the puzzle that I think would fit really nicely. Again, my final comment on this slide is great news. High Point is already well on its way, and we are. Okay. So what we have to do to become a bee city, again, they've lined it out. It's very easy. We do have to form a committee, and we can do that under Keep High Point Beautiful that's already well established under Public Services and the city. So we've got the framework already. They want us to designate a local government department. Again, Public Services is very easy. We complete the online application and submit the resolution. They've provided a draft resolution. They've really laid that groundwork very easily for us. And then we submit when we're ready, if approved by council. We will submit the resolution, the application, and then we pay an annual fee of $500. So we would pay that fee this time as an application fee. That fee is due every year at the end of February. So we're right on time to submit this application. We'd have our fee paid, and then next year we'd be looking at $500. That would come out of the Public Services Department budget under Environmental Services Division, and the funds are available. So I know that was quick, but I just want to say thank you and answer any questions that you might have. I also would like to encourage you, if you have a chance, Bee City USA has a wonderful website. They've got a 15-minute narrated presentation where they just do an amazing job, and I would love to encourage anyone interested here to take a look at that. So.
Thank you, Rebecca. Questions, comments?
Yeah.
Great program.
Chairman Hudson, if I could speak. This is Councilman Jefferson. So first, I got to say thank you for this presentation. I think this is the kind of strategies that we want to employ that fit both the short-term and long-term, I think, plans for the city, right? We believe our city is already so awesome for a lot of reasons, but given our legacy and history, and given our most recent goal that we're pushing forward to be this World Arts and Design capital, we certainly prioritize the aesthetic of what our city looks like, and keeping High Point beautiful, and that means all of the wildlife. That also means the many gardens and things, shrubbery and greens that make our city beautiful is so critical, right? It helps the livability, and this is certainly perfect for that. Also, I'm mindful of the fact that, as a city, we have been navigating and combating the food security issues that we've had for so long. So any initiative that allows us to address that, again, both in the short term and long term, it doesn't just help us address the issue and find some way to boost the here and now, but when you bring in, hopefully, native wildlife, it's the kind of thing that sustains itself over and over again. As you said, it contributes to 1/3 of our food and beverage consumption. So those are two things that stand out, and how much I appreciate this presentation. Thinking about budgetary impact, you mentioned the $500 fee that gets paid each year. While I know that's the sort of dollars out the pocket that we can name and spot, I don't imagine that there's a major budgetary impact on some of the other items, but I'm at least mindful of it, and I'm curious if it's worth talking about. And I don't know this at all. Public Services, I imagine you guys think about when you start talking about adjusting pesticides. I don't know what that looks like when you do that kind of adjustment at scale. Do we feel like that could have a potential budgetary impact that needs to be considered at all? I imagine we use pesticides all over the city for different reasons, but you start talking about adjusting that pesticide to something that's more organic, then the unit price is probably nominal, but again, at scale, what does that look like year over year? Do we have any idea from other examples? I see we have the town of Garner here, but are there others who have adjusted their pesticides and seen some considerable budgetary impact to that?
So in the FAQ section that they provided, they basically said, once you apply, then we'll open up and send you what others have done. So it wasn't available to read what others have done, but it is my understanding that you're working towards a goal. We would have to submit something if we began this year, we would have to submit a plan that we will try to implement, what we're going to try to do by next year. But I think it's all very much, what can your city do? They're very reasonable in, what your committee is made, who makes up your committee, what can you commit to? They're not so hardcore that they're like, well, if you don't do X, Y, Z, you're out. That is the information that I read and what I took from it. So, but I totally understand, what does that look like long-term budgetary commitment? I think it would be a conversation with those who do pesticides for the city. And obviously with residents, we would be educating and not saying you have to do this or have to do that. So I think PNR, if I'm not mistaken, probably would need to have a conversation and just say, here's what we've learned, kind of.
Yeah. Chairman Hudson, what I'd say is that, I'm fine making the motion to support this and it going to full council. What I do think is that when it goes to full council, if we can have that information present, maybe between now and then to reach out to PNR. I also think even though B City USA won't give us access, if there's others that we know who have done it, if we just get on the horn, maybe give someone a call there to say, hey, we get it, maybe you've only done it for a few years, but was there anything significant in terms of your budgetary impact on chemicals with pesticides? I know when we try to go organic on our chemicals, I know how it impacts my grocery bill.
Sure.
At 110 Dogwood Circle, I can't imagine for a city of 120,000 where we've got so many assets and facilities that we are just mindful of that and what our acreage is and how we use pesticides. So if we could just have that information present for full council, I imagine that would be appreciated. Also, what I heard you say, thinking about budgetary impact on time spent and some of those events and things of that nature, if we're partnering with folks, and Keep High Point Beautiful already shows up in so many places, I imagine there's not going to be a major budgetary impact to that either in terms of time spent with sort of the awareness and things. It sounds like there's not a lot of constraints or restrictions here that would limit what residents can do in the city, and how we continue to, I think, again, I think this has so much upside to it. I'm in favor of it regardless, but I think mitigating those concerns is going to continue to be critical, and just being very aware of what those risks are and how we can monitor and address those risks as they come up. I think that would be really great.
Absolutely, thank you. And I failed to mention this. I've got a meeting set up with Keep Winston-Salem Beautiful and their Bee City program next week to have a Zoom conversation because we're new to this. And I thought, well, if they've done it for about 5 years, I think, we could probably learn a lot. So I will specifically ask about that portion.
Yeah, absolutely. Just piggybacking on what he said, thank you for bringing that up because I didn't really think about that. I think when I hear about Bee City, I think more about like what Burn High Point's doing and the sensory garden but when you look at the whole city and all the public spaces that the public services take care of, if all of those have to be 100% applicable to this, then it could run up a big bill. So thank you for bringing that up. It'd be interesting to learn about that.
Sure.
Yeah, so you've got your assignment once again, Robbie, thank you.
Yeah. But we need to adopt it. We need to make a motion from our committee.
Yeah.
Chairman Hudson, I'll make a motion that we accept the resolution and look forward to receiving some of that additional information when it gets to full council.
Okay.
Second.
There's a motion and a second, and I'll do a little discussion because I'm a shameless plugger here. I have beehives with the city and beehives myself, and I'm avid, of course, beekeeper. I think one of the parts of this that is key is education. The difference between pesticide and herbicide, Roundup's not a pesticide, Roundup's an herbicide, and they work very, very different. Roundup doesn't bother bees. That's not this. Herbicides don't have anything to do with insects, but if you spray for insects, you kill them all. There's no such thing as a selective pesticide, or if you spray for mosquitoes in your yard, you're killing every insect that comes in the yard. There's not a selective pesticide. So that's a very, very important part of this whole puzzle that people need to understand, the difference between herbicide, pesticide, and pesticides are not selective. So I would be interested in what pesticides the city actually uses now, where we use them. I'm sure a lot of it is around the wet areas, but how we're using them now and what we can do to cut down on that. Also, feasibility of making some of our public rights-of-way native grasses, native pollinators. It's expensive to do that. Is it more expensive to do that than it is to mow every week? That's it's the million-dollar question that everybody asks. But can we implement some of it, and can we make learning areas? So, not to give you more to do, Robbie, but there's some more to do.
Yeah, and those are really awesome points. I think when all that comes to full council, it'll be a discussion. I see this resolution being passed, knowing that we don't have to have it perfect to get started, which is awesome. We can continue to navigate and figure out and make some key decisions along the way, and just do what's in the best interest of the full city.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time.
So there's a first and a second. Any further discussion? Not all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
And if any partner in the city wants a beehive, let me know. My wife would love to get them out of the garage. Partner? Our next item is an update on our public art policy. And I'm not sure who's going to be presenting this one. Go ahead, Eric.
Just give you a little bit of
Yeah.
background on the existing policy. Was adopted in August of 2014. It was revised in 2015 to kind of broaden where in the city that that art could be displayed. But we brought this forward more just for awareness, to make sure that city staff members and community partners knew that we actually had a policy already. And the policy was geared more towards when we were accepting the artwork that you see around a couple of the intersections in town. It was really more about that kind of static art and those installations. And so the policy as it stands is, I think, it could use some improvement with some of the other art that we've seen proposed and installed around town. But again, it was just more to bring this forward to the committee to start that discussion.
Right, absolutely. And public art is not murals painted on the sides of walls. That's something different. So if you see something painted on the wall of a building, that's not considered public art. That falls under sign ordinance, basically. And those are a totally different set of rules. This is actual freestanding art. Melody, you're here. Would you like, is there anything that you can brief us on the process of bringing this? Because you were probably involved in this. I remember when we were doing this with Livability Arts Committee.
Certainly. We're glad that there is a policy that is in place. We understand that the spirit of it was with the kinetic pieces and some of our statues that are here in town. A lot of the discussion right now amongst our community groups sometimes does center around murals. And even temporary installations. For example, we had a temporary installation that happened at the opening week of the Rockers home games that week in April. Even though those were interactive seesaws, that was public art that was commissioned, not from a local artist, but from outside, and that was brought in. As we are experiencing or exploring a second installation for 2023, perhaps we would look at some public areas where we could do that. And that's where that policy would really come into play, and have a conversation with city council and our city manager to make sure that, we're checking off the boxes within that policy. Amongst our community leaders, we are reviewing some of the goals from city council, particularly the ones that center around art and design and becoming more competitive within that arena. We were discussing, how a public art policy would come into play, maybe with a more comprehensive master plan. And we know that those things take time, but we think that we have some basic bones to work with in order to really implement something of that nature. And so, maybe that's just a report to Prosperity and Livability at a later date as those ideas perk along.
Can you work
Yeah.
through that with Viva Art?
I think so. We've had 2 conversations just in the last 5 days. So those conversations are happening very quickly. I think those are conversations that are really going to center between Visit High Point, the City of High Point by Design, and our local arts council. I think that's a good core group to start with. Yeah.
Good. Questions from the committee?
Yeah, I've got a question. Okay, so, and I don't know who can answer this, Megan, maybe you. So do all cities consider murals to fall under a signage ordinance rather than a public art? All cities do that?
I don't know if I would say all, but I would say generally most definitely do it, because if you think about it, it's typically on a piece of private property
Yeah.
where they put the artwork on the side of a building, like the chairman said. So typically, it's under the sign ordinance.
Okay. Interesting, okay.
And I wanted to make one note that when you're reviewing the policy that currently exists, hearing what you're saying, this is mostly for residential neighborhoods. So to the extent that the vision or some of the thoughts are for locations outside of residential neighborhoods, this policy would most likely have to be revised and updated to reflect that. Because right now, those are the areas, it's residential neighborhoods, and in very certain limited instances, limited mixed-use components. So it also, if we're talking about thoroughfares, more commercial areas, then we'd have to update this.
Okay, because it seems like recently I was in Kansas City, and then just real recently I was in New Orleans, and I love looking around, and I mean, I kind of think of murals as public art, but I guess I was incorrect in that. But it seems to me like we need a lot of revisions on our policy to do what I think is the will of this council. We want to see art, and we want to make it easy. We want people to, I think that sometimes we are afraid, well, if we allow this, somebody's going to do this, and I don't really want to have that mentality. I mean, artists are artists, and we want a beautiful city. We want to make High Point beautiful. And so whatever we need to do as far as, or whatever the other council members think, to make sure that we have an easy policy in place that says, yes, we want art, that encourages artists to come, that encourages businesses to invest in art in our city. Whatever we need to do, I'd like for us to ask staff to please make that happen.
I think that's also your intent is, the only real thing, sticking point that we really get with murals is when words are involved. And when you get words involved, you get a whole nother policy about advertisement or, when you put words on a mural, it changes what it is. It changes it to advertisements.
And as I think council knows, or the commission knows, the sign ordinance has a draft that's going to planning and zoning in 2 weeks. So in January, the Planning and Zoning Commission is going to review the sign ordinance draft, and then we'll come to you in February. So, happy to share what that draft is, because it does address murals. And, if there's any suggested revisions or anything like that, it's been on the website for months. On the Planning and Development has a website for the sign ordinance, and it's been open for public comment. To my understanding is that they have not received a lot of public comment, but murals are addressed in it, so it's something that you might want to take a look at. And if there's any input or, adjustments that need to be made before it's adopted, happy to hear those. I'm sure planning is as well.
Yeah.
I'm already envisioning bee art, like a bee mural and a kinetic bee. So,
Yeah. That,
Andrews has that mural now. Have you seen Andrews? Andrews High School has,
yeah.
they've
because
They've got exactly that.
Oh, wow, I haven't seen it.
The point about the words that came up, I know in our conversations about street painting a few years ago, when all around the country, folks were painting streets. As sort of a part of that, the conversation that was going on in summer 2020. And that's, I mean, that's a curious thing, because art is an expression of individuals a lot of times. And it's subjective just in nature. And what then becomes, what then becomes the consequence of that? Not that it has to restrict, to your point, like, we want a beautiful city. And I think the great thing is there's so much research that we can pull from in terms of other examples of folks who are doing it. And we get to learn from unfortunate instances, and instances where they get it really right? Because you're right. I mean, we can't be that world arts and design capital without the beautiful downtown aesthetic. It goes hand in hand, and the public art's a big part of that too. And then also our gateways into the city, right? How do you know you are entering a world arts and design capital? And so it's a healthy sort of walk. It's, to your point, Monica, or Mayor Pro Tem Peters, sorry. It's not about avoiding the risk, but it's about managing the risk. Because the risk has that return that we believe in, which is the High Point, North Carolina's international city. What it resonates for every person who walks through our city, who drives through our city, who views our city. There is a presence that you get when you allow that art to flourish. And how do we do that in such a way that we can still protect, I think, what's still valuable, which is this still is a city for all people. And once art starts going up that has different messages, it works both ways. Messages of unity and love, I think we all find are okay. It can just start going a whole lot of ways in terms of messages. So I'm curious about that. I'm curious about that.
Councilman Jefferson, I think that's very, very helpful points to kind of direct us in our research, and we can come back with some recommendations for you. The current policy right now, I believe, says no words. Again,
Or logos or symbols is also included in that. So
Right.
you can't put golden arches on the middle of the street. So
right, because
Yeah,
I
but
think
you know
you
what?
have kind of commercial, which is what you're getting at, and then you also have
Right.
things that are more of messages versus like pure art. So these are all great areas that I think that we need to take a deep dive into, do some research, and if, once we understand that what you're looking at is perhaps murals, artwork, not just street painting, but the whole gamut, then we can take a deeper dive into it. And I think this definitely needs to be updated then, if that's the case.
But if we can please be really careful, because that's why we lost Harley Davidson. I mean, I don't know if y'all know that, maybe I'm wrong, but they were not allowed to paint their wings, and so they went somewhere else. So, I mean, I think we have to be really cautious with that. I don't know what the answer is. I guess find out what maybe other cities do to make sure that things like that. I mean, because I see Harley Davidson paintings on their buildings like everywhere, so I don't know why we have an issue with that, if that's the case, and maybe I'm incorrect, but,
Yeah, I don't know
okay.
that story.
Okay.
But this policy came about specifically for painting streets.
Correct.
I mean, that's why we started this through Viva Arts. It was,
That's actually,
I'm sorry.
Can I make one more?
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
that's actually a different policy, though. The street painting is separate.
But
from
that
this
didn't
public
work, didn't these come out at the same time? I thought these,
No, this is this is
Right,
like
well,
murals as signage,
Yeah.
and is that a logo? I mean, everybody knows, if you see the Harley Davidson wings, you know that's Harley Davidson.
Yeah.
So
I thought we
how
did both
can
of
we-
these at exactly the
Yeah,
same
no,
time.
forgive me, Chairman Hudson. The reason why I brought it up is that I recall when we were talking about the street painting, we were talking about messages.
Yeah.
To your point about still with some pieces of public art, messages that resonate. I don't know about the Harley Davidson thing.
I mean, some logos are very, very artistic. So do we want businesses that have really artistic, creative logos and stuff not to be able to put their, I mean, I just think that I think that we have made it too difficult. We draw too many boxes and we don't think outside the box enough. So that's what I think, and I think we need to be real cautious of that, because we do want the creative, especially as we're going into art and design. Like if a really cool creative whatever comes, and then their logo is beautiful, and they put it, and then we're not allowing it, I think we have to be really, really careful with that. But I'm sorry, Melody, I see that you're up there.
No, I just want to give you guys some examples, and I'm not going to get real specific, but, you know, as we're cultivating a tighter or broader policy, whichever we decide on, you know, when Civic Brand comes out with their recommendations, let's just say that we explore what street benches looks like. Maybe it has an artistic appeal to it. Would that be relevant to the public art policy? Let's just say that maybe we're reevaluating what lampposts look like. Maybe there's lampshades on the lamppost. Would that be relevant to this policy? So, you know, and that's public spaces. I've even heard creatives talk about art within the roundabout near the Krispy Kreme, and, you know, what could a statue look like there that would be more relevant to scale. So I think that we just haven't explored the possibility of the magnitude of this policy at the time. So I'd be interested to see what Civic Brand comes out with, to see how that translates to our current policy.
Good. Anything further? If not, we have good starting points, lots of talking points here to think about. If not, our last item is an update on our tree replacement on Main Street, which I'm sure you've seen. It's quite beautiful.
Yes, thank you. Andy Piper, Senior Planner with the Planning and Development Department. Just here to give a quick update on, as you mentioned, the Main Street tree planting, which, just to kind of recap where this kind of came from, last year the council approved a long-term funded tree plan, which with the goals of making High Point a net positive tree city, where we have more trees planted than are removed each year, to develop a tree replacement plan for Main Street. Also look at contracting with a nursery to grow plants, trees that we need on an annual basis, as well as introducing an annual tree giveaway. And all this was supported in the annual budget, which, just by the way, is coming up again, I know, so I'll just put that plug in. But we're here to talk about this item, which is to develop a Main Street tree replacement plan. And I'll just note here quickly on the picture that you see on North Main Street in particular, and we're talking about the 100 and 200 blocks of North Main Street in particular. These trees were what called Armstrong maples, and they were infected with something called gloomy scale, which is actually a pest. It's a very small scale insect that kind of saps the life out of the trees over a long term. So that's what we had going on, and that was the impetus for focusing where we started, which is, again, on the 100, 200. So we're talking from about the railroad tracks up to English Road. So we had 12 Armstrong maples that were infected with the gloomy scale that we removed. And we also had a couple Bradford pears. The Bradford pears are generally considered an invasive tree species. They also are quite weak. The wood is quite weak, and they're prone to breakage. And in fact, we had been working on this since last spring about, doing this plan. Right before we were getting ready to remove the trees, one of the Bradford pears during when Hurricane Ian came through actually broke and fell into the street and had to be removed and damaged its neighbor. So definitely reinforced that we were on the right track of getting rid of these two Bradford Bradford pears as well.
And there are several cities who have said
No
it's
more.
against policy to plant a Bradford pear.
Yeah, certainly if we have the opportunity, we would not replace with the Bradford pear. But it did, we did have we had budgeted, the removal of 14 trees. Well, one was already gone. So we did look, and there was also a Zelkova, Japanese Zelkova, that was also kind of dying back right there on the corner. You'll see northwest corner or northeast corner of English and Main. So we decided to go ahead and remove that tree as well. There was a smaller holly tree there with no health concerns that we did leave in place. So those trees were moved, I think, in November. We had the contractor, J.D. Mills and Company, that we had contracted with to come remove those trees with the help of the Transportation Department, and also blocking off traffic while we did that. And then a few weeks later, what we did to replace those trees is planted 4 what are called Princeton Century Ginkgo trees. And I'll just preface that the reason we selected the trees that we did, they're good, generally considered good street trees. They have a narrow growing habit, so they're not going to grow out into the street. The Princeton Centuries get about 40, 50 feet tall, so they will get tall, but they're going to be about 15 to 18 feet wide at maturity. In addition, we planted 4 what are called Franz Fontaine. It's actually European hornbeam. And those will get not quite as tall, 30 to 35 feet tall, a little narrower as well, 12 to 15 feet wide at maturity. So obviously we removed 14 trees. We still have 6 more trees that we want to plant, mainly at the corners. There are some issues with site visibility and the traffic lights there. So we want to get a very kind of small growing understory tree. I've identified what's called an American hop hornbeam as a good, it's a native tree. It's generally called an ironwood, very hardy. It's a good street tree and won't get as tall. It's about 20, 25 feet at maturity. Having a little trouble finding those, which kind of goes back to the original point, like would be great if we could get these trees that we plant in advance and then we know we're going to need so that we have them on hand. Found some in Georgia. We'd have to get them shipped up here. I'd prefer if we could find one locally. So we're still looking for that, and then we will plant that. And I should mention Parks and Recreation street maintenance folks were the ones who planted the tree, so we appreciate that. So still 6 more to come, but got a little over half of them planted. And just to give you kind of an idea, so here on the left, you'll see that's the tree that's been planted. Obviously, they're a little small. When you go through there, you had the big tall trees. So these smaller trees are going to take some time to grow up into those spaces. But here's kind of a stock photo that you see on the right of what that tree generally will look like in the future. The ginkgos have a great yellow fall color that is really striking. The other type I mentioned is the hornbeam. Again, as you can see on the left there, smaller tree now. Give you a general idea there on the right-hand side. Again, a narrow kind of column type tree. So that's, in the long term, that's what you can expect along those Main Street. So what's next? So we've already had some interest expressed in, I think once people saw that, said, hey, well, what about the trees a little further north on North Main Street? We have some older holly trees. So I think we need to look at, kind of how this expands north. Also south, we had initially talked about working with the Market Authority as well as Keep High Point Beautiful about working on the South Main Street portion and maybe some additional planting opportunities in the downtown area around the market. So we'll be looking at that. It'll probably be a next year item. And then also need to focus on replacement trees throughout the city using an equitable approach. One of the things we were able to do with the funding is we got something called, it's an app called Tree Plotter. It's an online-based thing where we can kind of track our trees and what gets removed and where we're replacing it. And so it's kind of a way to manage and track what we're doing. So we can see that we're getting it spread around everywhere and not just focused on the downtown. And again, the issue with the availability, so we need to work on that and how that would, how we would do that. And then I'll just mention, as I usually do with these things, as we grow our urban canopy, just keep in mind the workforce necessary to maintain the trees also needs to grow with that. So, and I know, I think everybody here understands it's difficult right now finding people to help with that, but in the long term, we need to keep that in mind, that as we add trees, that adds maintenance responsibilities as well. So that's just a quick update, and
Thank you, Andy.
I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
I have a question.
Sure.
So, and this is, it's about trees, but it's not necessarily, do any of the trees, are all the trees at the library healthy. Do any of those need to be maybe replaced so that they will look good this summer?
I mean, yeah, that's a good question, and we should look at that. I don't know of any. I've not been made aware of any
Okay.
replacement issues.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, but certainly it's something we want to maintain.
I
But
will say that the front entrance area in the sensory garden project will be happening soon.
Okay,
So those the trees and the planters themselves will be moved from that front area as part of that project. So,
okay. Thank you.
Andy, thank you for this presentation, and shout out to the P&R team who's been helping to plant on the trees. Appreciate that. That's awesome. What I'm curious about, and I know when you gave us the big presentation and we approved this the last go-around, I know we looked at timeline and budgetary numbers and some of that then. I'd love to, if you don't mind, at some point, maybe not next meeting, but at some point in the near future, but not too distant future, we could look at timelines, not only for planting, but timelines for maturity on some of the trees. And then also look at that relative to budgetary impact on what we're planting. I think it's worth considering where the opportunities present themselves and where feasible and possible. And by no stretch of the imagination do I know as much as I probably need to know about this topic. But for trees that are a little bit more mature that can be planted, and the cost to plant some of those in some strategic locations, I'd love to look at that and look at, just so we can manage the expectations regarding, where we do go with the more affordable option, which is a less mature tree, and what its timeline is before it starts to yield any type of aesthetic or any type of greenery or anything. Just so that way we're managing the expectations regarding that. And then also thinking strategically about those places where we say, hey, it may behoove us, and maybe it's a better, looking at cost benefit analysis, the cost to plant a more mature tree here could bring a better benefit because it's a higher traffic area, and the aesthetic just is something that we probably want to invest in more. So I'm curious about that, especially as you start getting to the downtown and market stuff, and even some of these other places on Main Street too.
yeah, and I will say, again, yes, we had some larger trees. These are smaller trees. It's going to take some time to get out there. But in this case in particular, we do need the right tree as well. So sometimes there's a balance between availability, and it's not really a cost issue. But we could plant a larger tree to get the initial splash, but if it's not that right tree over the long term. So balancing availability and cost. But yeah, I understand. And I'd be happy to look into that and provide, there may be other areas that aren't quite so constricted that we could have more options available as far as, and again, if we could have an agreement with a local nursery knowing we could get these certain types of trees. It would take some time, obviously, to grow them till where they get that mature look and feel right out of the gate. But I understand the question, and would be happy to provide some more information on that at a point in time.
If you don't mind, I'd love to. And I mean, you all feel free to determine, Chairman Hudson, whoever feels it's a good day for us to hear back on that. But just, it'll come up. I know it will. Folks will say, I mean, they're going to ask about trees we're planting, and I'd love to know some more information, and just to inform folks about maturity of some of these things.
I, as a landscaper, I can take some of the pressure off of you. The trees that we're looking for downtown are very specific trees. So if you want to plant a Bradford pear, for example, a Bradford pear is a landscaping tree that they plant in communities. So you plant 100 of them at a time. So they'll grow 10 feet, but they tend to be a very fast-growing tree. These trees, a ginkgo tree is a very specific tree, because like Andy says, we want that column form, which is not as standard. a tree, I guess. So a ginkgo tree typically is not a residential tree. I don't plant them, very often. They're not as readily available. So if you get landscape trees that are not going residential, they don't want big trees. They don't sell them that way. So it is a very hard market to find a specific tree that is tall. They just don't have, there's not a market for it, I guess. So there are two different types of landscaping. One's residential and one is this specific kind of tree. The other thing is if you allow a tree to get big, once you get to about 5 years, if you transplant it, you reduce the timeline. So if you plant a 5-year-old tree and it's a 50-year tree, if you plant it at 10 years, you're reducing it to about a 40-year tree. So as you move away from infant tree, you reduce the lifespan of the tree. You also reduce the ability to prune it and make it pretty. So there are a lot of, I know you're talking about what happens when the general public says, let's plant some bigger trees. That's a long-winded answer to that. I don't know if there is a simple answer, but the trees that we're planting, like a hornbeam, no one plants European hornbeams. I know what they are, but that's not a really typical plant. It's a very specific plant, so it's a very specific nursery that you're buying it from. That being said.
But if we look at more residential areas where we have a large growing space, we could put a larger tree. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's going to be very site, I guess, specific, I guess is the short answer.
And when we originally started this plan, that's why we wanted to employ a nursery to grow what we want to grow. Because as Andy says, we can't find an American hornbeam. And that's not an uncommon tree. We just can't find one now. So that's why we want that second half of the long-term plan, so that we can plant what we want to plant and grow them as we need. So I know that's not an easy answer to the question, but that's kind of where we are.
Thank you.
Anything else, Andy?
Thank you.
If not, thank you so much. I'm glad to see this, glad to see that coming to fruition. Anything further?
Chairman Hudson, I would just like to say
Please go
thank you to everyone who's here, who presented today, and everyone who's been involved in the collective efforts to create a single most livable, safe, and prosperous community in America. We appreciate you. We don't want to take your efforts for granted or taken lightly. It's that kind of innovation and that kind of commitment that keeps High Point going forward. So thank you guys so much.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, we also had a presentation by Ms. Bridges about Uleek's Cultural Center in November, and you asked for information to come back to this meeting. Ms. Bridges did ask that that be postponed until February, so we'll have some more information in February.
Okay. All right. If nothing